Hey everyone, as many of you know, my channel is currently demonetized, and many of our videos were deleted. Creating stories and videos for you still takes a lot of time, effort, and support behind the scenes, so I created a donation link for anyone who would like to support the channel. If my videos have entertained you, helped you relax, or become part of your daily routine, even a small donation truly means a lot and helps me continue creating more content for you. I genuinely love making stories for you all, but demonetization has made it much harder to keep posting consistently. If you'd like to support the channel, simply click the PayPal donation link in the description or the pinned comment below, or scan the QR code on the screen. You'll be taken directly to our donation page, where you can donate any amount you want. You can pay easily using PayPal, debit card, credit card, and Apple Pay. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and being part of this journey. Your kindness truly keeps this channel alive. Now, let's dive into today's story. Before we get into tonight's story, let me tell you why I wrote it. Every year, thousands of kids get hurt at school, and the scariest part isn't always the bullies. It's the adults who look away. Studies on school violence keep finding the same ugly pattern. Most serious incidents had warning signs that somebody in authority saw and buried, because the bullies were athletes, or their parents wrote checks, or it was just easier to call it boys being boys. Tonight's story is about what happens when the system fails the wrong kid. A kid whose father spent 22 years hunting the worst men on Earth for a living. Now, I'm not telling you revenge is the answer. Legally, morally, statistically, it's not, and you'll see that even our hero pays a price for every line he crosses. But there's a lesson buried in this story about documentation, about chains of evidence, about why predators only thrive in silence, and about how the most dangerous person in any room is usually the quietest one. So grab your coffee, lock your door, and remember, weakness and patience look identical until the clock runs out. Gabriel Dolan had spent 22 years learning the rhythms of other men's lives so he could end them or cage them. And he had come to Calder's Bluff, Tennessee to forget every minute of it. The Army never called what he did hunting, but that's what it was. He'd joined Delta at 26, and after Mosul, after a flooded basement full of things he never described to anyone, he'd been folded into a task force that did one thing. It found war criminals, militia colonels who'd machine-gunned villages, contractors who'd massacred civilians and laundered it as crossfire. Gabriel built their lives backward from garbage, gate patterns, prayer schedules, mistresses, debts. He learned that every man, no matter how careful, leaves a wake. And then, one day, Gabriel would simply be standing in that wake, and the man's life as he knew it would be over. He retired a sergeant major at 47 because Hope asked him to, and because his son Calvin was 13 and had started flinching when Gabriel reached for the salt. Calder's Bluff was Hope's hometown, a quarry town strangled around the fist of one family. The Star aggregate pit had paid for the high school gym, the sheriff's cruisers, and the stadium lights, and Randy Starr collected on every dollar. Hope used to say the town had two religions, church on Sunday and Star wrestling on Friday, and only one of them forgave sins. Hope was gone 14 months now. Ovarian cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral. Gabriel had outweighted warlords in mountain hides for 19 days without moving, but he had not been able to wait out those 11 weeks, and the unfairness of it still woke him at 3 a.m. with his heart slamming. What kept him sane was Calvin, 15 now, lean and quiet, a kid who photographed herons at the river and could sit motionless beside his father for an hour, which Gabriel privately considered a rarer talent than anything taught at Fort Bragg. Calvin wasn't weak. People mistook stillness for weakness in both Dolan men. In September, Calvin had stepped between 3 older boys and a freshman they were stuffing into a recycling bin, and he'd taken a split lip rather than step aside. He never told Gabriel. Gabriel found out from the school counselor, Tammy Fowler, at a parent night, and he'd felt something in his chest he didn't have a word for. Pride was too small. The trouble had a shape before it had a name. Calvin went quiet in October, skipped dinner, locked his phone. Twice Gabriel found him awake at 2 a.m., sitting in Hope's old reading chair in the dark. When Gabriel asked, Calvin said school was fine, and he said it the way men in interrogation rooms say they've never been to Aleppo. So Gabriel did what fathers are supposed to do. He made an appointment with the school. He sat across from Principal Merle Carroll, silver-haired, tan, a state championship ring on his finger and a smile like a salesman closing, and laid out his concern. Carroll spread his hands. Mr. Dolan, Calder High has the lowest disciplinary rate in the county. Boys sort themselves out, always have. Then, leaning back, maybe the issues at home. Single fathers, military background. Kids absorb that tension. Gabriel had looked at that smile a beat too long, filed it, and left. He told himself, this is a school, not a battlefield. Stand down. It was the only operational mistake he'd made in 2 decades. and he would spend the rest of his life carrying it. In November, a 3-day contract came up, teaching a tracking course to a federal task force. In Knoxville, good money and Calvin practically pushed him out the door. "Go, Dad, I'm 15, not 9. The last normal thing his son ever said to him. The text came at 11:47 on the second night, while Gabriel stood in a hotel parking lot under a dead streetlight. They said they'd slit my throat if I told. Dad, I'm sorry. I tried to be like you, then nothing. Calls straight to voicemail. The location app showed Calvin's phone offline. Last ping at 10:52 p.m. The Star Aggregate Quarry, North Pitt. Gabriel covered the 178 miles to Calder's Bluff in under 2 hours, and he spent every one of those minutes doing what he'd been built to do. Breathing slow, planning, refusing to feel anything yet. The house was empty. Calvin's bike was gone. At 2:31 a.m., Blount Regional Hospital called the number listed for Calvin Dolan's next of kin. A county lineman checking storm damage had found a boy at the base of the North Pitt's pump house, half in the water, in 40-degree dark. Skull fracture, orbital fractures both sides. 4 broken fingers, the fingers broken backward, deliberately, one at a time. Cracked ribs, hypothermia, brain swelling that put him into surgery before his father reached the door. Gabriel stood in the ICU at 4 a.m. and looked at his son wired to life support. Ventilator clicking, skull half-shaved, a monitor drawing the small, stubborn mountains of a 15-year-old heartbeat. And the nurse, a steady-eyed woman named Erica Howell, touched his arm and said the surgeon was good, and the next 72 hours would tell them everything. 72 hours. Gabriel Dolan stood very still beside the bed, the way he could be still, and somewhere far down inside him, a door he had welded shut in 2019 began, quietly, to open. By sunrise, the town had already chosen its story. Sheriff Deb Perkins arrived at the hospital with his hat in his hands and his conclusion in his pocket. "Looks like your boy was out at the quarry rope swing after dark," he said. "Kids do it every fall. Slipped on the pump house ladder. Lord, it's a miracle that lineman found him. He texted me that someone threatened to slit his throat," Gabriel said. 55 minutes before his phone went dark at that quarry. Perkins's jaw worked. Kids exaggerate. Could be about anything. Video games. His fingers were broken backward, Sheriff, one at a time. Falls don't do that. I'll have somebody look into it. Perkins put his hat on, which in Calder's Bluff meant the looking was over. Gabriel didn't argue. 22 years of interviews had taught him that a lying man tells you more than an honest one, and Perkins had just told him plenty. The sheriff already knew the names, and his job was to make sure Gabriel never did. Gabriel noted the Star Aggregate sticker on the cruiser's bumper. Half the department's vehicles were donated, and said, "Thank you for coming." In a voice so calm, Perkins glanced back twice on his way out. That afternoon, because procedure mattered and because he wanted the refusal on record, Gabriel went to the school. Merle Carroll received him in an office wallpapered with team photos, 2 decades of Calder Pit Vipers wrestling squads, and in half of them, 6 current faces Gabriel didn't yet have names for. Carroll didn't stand. He let Gabriel speak. The text, the quarry, the deliberate injuries, and the whole time something glittered in the principal's eyes that wasn't sympathy. It was appetite. A man watching a meal he'd ordered finally arrive. "Terrible thing," Carroll said. "But I'll tell you what I see, since nobody else will." He laced his fingers behind his head. "I see a boy who couldn't handle this school. Couldn't handle losing his mama. Went out to that quarry at night doing God knows what." And then Merle Carroll chuckled, actually chuckled. A low, comfortable sound, and said, "Your boy's weak. Just like you, soldier." The word soldier sat in the air between them like a fingerprint. Gabriel had never told this man he was a soldier. Not at parent night, not in October. His file said federal contractor, retired. Gabriel looked at Merle Carroll for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded, once slowly, turned and walked out. Behind him, he heard the chuckle again, fainter, satisfied. In the parking lot, a woman was waiting by his truck, hugging a folder like it might bolt. Tammy Fowler, the counselor. "I'll lose my job for this," she said, and handed it over anyway. "Calvin came to me 2 weeks ago." He was shaking. "He said there's a thing the wrestlers run at the quarry called Pit Night. Initiations. He said in September they took a girl out there, Nikki Soto, and what they did to her, and he said he had it on his phone, and he didn't know what to do because of who their fathers are." Her eyes were wet and furious. "I filed a report." Carroll pulled it the same day. "Told me Calvin was a troubled kid making up stories for attention, and if I escalated it, he'd document me as the unstable one. Yesterday my report disappeared from the system, the whole file." "Who are they?" Gabriel asked quietly. "The wrestlers." She gave him 6 names like she was handing over live grenades: Ricky Starr, Devin Dixon, Juan Guerrero, Gene Phillips, Felipe Price, Tim Forbes. The sons, respectively, of the quarry, the car dealership, the concrete company, the gun shop, the bar that held the sheriff's bar tab. and the insurance agency that held everyone's mortgages. The town in 6 boys. That night, in his garage with the lights off, Gabriel Dolan did something he hadn't done since retirement. He took down the long roll of butcher paper, taped it across the wall, and began to build target packages. He worked the way the task force had taught him. Pattern of life first, vulnerability second, intentions last. By dawn, he had the boys' class schedules, practice times, social accounts, vehicles, girlfriends, the trail network where Dixon and Phillips raced dirt bikes on Sunday nights, the river dock where Guerrero and Price drank on Fridays, the gym hours Ricky Starr kept alone because the king lifts alone. He learned that Tim Forbes had deleted every photo of himself with the others in the past 48 hours, which told him Forbes was the cracked tile in the floor, and he kept circling back in red marker to one anomaly that didn't fit any of it. How does Carol know what I was? At the hospital, Erica Howell let him sit past visiting hours. Gabriel held his son's hand, the unbroken one, and spoke to him in the low, even voice he'd once used to talk a wounded teammate through a 9-hour exfil. He told Calvin about the Herons. He told him that being still was not the same as being weak, and the people who couldn't tell the difference were about to receive an education. 72 hours, the doctors kept saying. The next 72 hours will tell us everything. Gabriel decided the number worked both ways. Calvin's phone was at the bottom of the North Pit or in a Bully's Creekside burn barrel. But Calvin's phone had never been the point. 2 years ago, in the last good summer, Hope had set up the family's shared backup account, and she'd made a ritual of the password. The date the 3 of them got caught in a thunderstorm on the Rhone Highlands and laughed until they couldn't breathe, plus the name Calvin gave the heron that stalked their campsite. Nobody outside this tent will ever guess it, she'd said. Gabriel sat in Calvin's room on Calvin's old cracked tablet, typed the storm and the heron, and his dead wife let him in. The phone had synced at 10:51 p.m., 1 minute before it died. The last video was 4 minutes, 19 seconds long. Gabriel watched it once all the way through, motionless. Then he watched it again, the way he'd watched drone feeds of atrocities, cataloging, September, night. The pump house at the North Pit, lit by truck headlights, 6 boys in wrestling hoodies. A freshman named in the comments as the recruit, on his knees on the dock, sobbing, while Ricky Starr held his head under the black water and counted to 30 in a bored voice, and the others laughed and filmed on their own phones. Then the camera swung. Calvin had been hidden in the tree line. You could hear his breathing shaking the microphone, and found Nikki Soto, 16, being dragged to the pump house door by Guerrero and Price because, Ricky announced, snitches sleep in the cold tank. They padlocked her in. Her screaming through the steel went on under everything else. And then a phone on speaker, propped on a truck hood, and a voice Gabriel now knew well, warm, amused, administrative. Boys, wrap it up by 11. And Ricky, your daddy says the Soto girl's mother got her hours cut at the plant today. She'll understand the situation. Make sure the girl does too. Merle Carroll, coordinating, comfortable, practiced. The video ended with a branch snapping, the camera whipping, and Ricky Starr's voice suddenly close. Who's out there? 2 weeks later, Calvin had gone to Tammy Fowler. 2 weeks after that, 6 boys had lured or taken him to that same dock and broken his fingers backward one at a time, the fingers of the hand that held the camera, and caved in the face that had seen, and left him in the water they baptized their victims in. Gabriel sat in the dark for a long time. Then he opened his old case files, the personal encrypted archive every hunter keeps and no regulation ever finds, and typed the name Carroll. It was there in 90 seconds. Raymond Ray Carroll, former contractor, Vantage Solutions Group, Mosul, 2017. 17 civilians dead at a checkpoint. Written up as Insurgent Crossfire until a quiet sergeant major spent 8 months reconstructing the convoy. Zess route from cell tower data, a baker's testimony, and shell casings the man had been too arrogant to police. Gabriel's affidavit ran 41 pages. Ray Carroll got 30 years in Leavenworth, and on the courthouse steps his older brother, silver-haired, tan, a salesman's smile, had looked at Gabriel and mouthed something the marshals hadn't let him finish. Merle Carroll had taken the principal job in Calder's Bluff 3 years ago, 8 months after Hope Dolan's obituary ran in the county paper. The obituary that mentioned her surviving husband, Gabriel, U.S. Army, retired, and the hometown they'd be returning to. It hadn't been bullying. It had never been bullying. It was a man who couldn't touch a Delta Sergeant Major, so he had spent 3 years grooming a pack of entitled, violent boys, aiming them like a weapon system, and waiting for the soldier's quiet son to wander into range. Your boy's weak, just like you, soldier. It was a confession. He'd wanted Gabriel to know. That was the meal he'd been savoring. At 9 p.m., Calvin's monitors went into a flurry. Pressure spike, alarms, a crash team. Gabriel pressed against the glass with his palm flat on it. They stabilized him at 9:40. The neurosurgeon came out gray-faced and honest. He's fighting, but I won't lie to you. The next 3 days decide it. Gabriel walked to the window at the end of the ICU corridor. Below, Calder's Bluff glittered, small and certain of itself. Somewhere down there, 6 boys were sleeping fine, and a principal was pouring a scotch, and a sheriff was filing a 1-paragraph report about a rope swing. He took out his phone and called a number in Fayetteville. Ricardo Copeland, 20 years of doors and deserts together, the only man alive Gabriel had carried and been carried by, answered on the second. Ring like no time had passed, because for men like them it hadn't. It's Gabe, I need 3 days and a witness who'll lie about where I was. A pause. Then, tell me where I'm driving. Gabriel looked back down the corridor toward his son's room, at the small mountains marching across the monitor, and he nodded, once. 72 hours. Gabriel's first rule, drilled into 1,000 junior operators, was that you never start with the kill. You start with the ground. So he spent the first 12 hours not touching a single boy. He drove the quarry roads at dawn and learned that the North Pit's only camera was the one star aggregate had installed at the scale house, and that it fed to a DVR in an unlocked shed because nobody in Calder's Bluff had ever needed to lock anything from the stars. He learned that Deputy Glenn, Sheriff Perkins' nephew, ran the speed trap on County 9 every weekday between 7 and 8 a.m., which meant the road behind the school was empty at 7:15. He learned, from the public-facing booking system any taxpayer can read, that Sheriff Deb Perkins had quietly killed Tammy Fowler's original report by logging it as withdrawn by reporter, a forged withdrawal. With the sheriff's own badge number as the authorizing officer, he photographed all of it. He had learned in the worst classroom on earth that the man who documents survives the man who acts. Ricardo arrived at noon in a beige rental nobody would remember, with a duffel and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. They didn't hug. Ricardo just looked at the butcher paper on the garage wall, the 6 boys, the principal, the sheriff, the red lines connecting them, and said, "This is a network, not 6 kids." "It's a network," Gabriel agreed. "Then we don't fight it, we collapse it, make them do the work." That was the doctrine. You don't defeat a tight group by attacking it. You defeat it by making its members fear each other more than they fear you. The task force had toppled a militia of 300 by convincing 4 lieutenants that the colonel had sold them out. 6 teenage boys held together by shared guilt, and a principal's protection would be easier. Guilt is the most flammable thing there is. Tim Forbes was the crack. Gabriel had marked him on night 1, the boy deleting photos, the boy whose father sold guns and whose conscience, therefore, came with a body count he'd been raised to ignore. Forbes worked Tuesday and Thursday evenings alone at the gun shop counter. On Tuesday at 6 p.m., a stranger in a quarry company cap set a manila envelope on that counter, said nothing, and left inside. A single still from the video. Tim Forbes, lit by headlights, laughing as Nikki Soto was dragged to the pump house, and one printed line, "She remembers your laugh. So does someone else now. No threat, no demand." Gabriel knew that an unexplained thing terrifies a guilty mind far more than a threat, because a threat tells you the size of the danger and silence lets you imagine it infinite. By Wednesday morning, Tim Forbes had texted the group 5 times asking who else got something, and gotten no answers, because Gabriel had sent only 1 envelope. The boy who thinks he's the only one being hunted starts looking at the others as the ones who gave him up. Meanwhile, Ricardo went to see Nikki Soto's mother, Loretta Sanchez, who'd had her plant hours cut for raising her voice. He didn't mention Gabriel. He mentioned a lawyer in Knoxville named Janine McGee, who took cases against small-town power on contingency and enjoyed it. He left a card. Seeds, Gabriel called this. You plant the legal ground at the same time as the other ground, so that when it's over there's a story the law can stand on, and the only people who fall are the ones who earned it. That night, Calvin's intracranial pressure dropped. Good news, careful news. Erica Howell told Gabriel his son had squeezed her hand during a reflex check. Gabriel sat by the bed and described, in his low, even voice, exactly what was going to happen to the people who'd put Calvin there. He'd never know if Calvin heard, but the heart rate on the monitor steadied while he talked, and Gabriel chose to believe it. He was driving home at midnight when Merle Carroll called his cell, a number Gabriel had never given the school. "Heard you've been asking around town." Carroll's voice, easy, amused. "Word of advice, soldier. Some quarries are deeper than others." "Be ashamed to lose 2. Gabriel said nothing. "Nothing to say? Good. That's the smart play. You're a smart, weak man, just like your boy." The chuckle. "Go home. Bury whatever you have to bury. Calder's Bluff takes care of its own." Gabriel let the silence stretch until even Carroll felt it. Then he said, quietly, "Ray says hello." The line went dead so fast it clicked. Gabriel almost smiled. Now he knows I know. Now he'll move. And a man who moves leaves a wake. Carroll moved exactly as predicted, which is the only kind of enemy worth having. Thursday, the principal called an emergency assembly and announced a memorial fund for our injured student, draping himself in the very tragedy he'd engineered. He had Ricky Starr stand up, Ricky the King, jaw clenched into something the town read as grief, and say a few words about praying for Calvin. Gabriel watched the live stream from his truck and noted which boys couldn't look at the camera. Forbes stared at the floor. Price's leg jackhammered. The network was already vibrating. Then Carroll made his real move. He went to Sheriff Perkins, and Perkins that afternoon drove to the hospital and informed Gabriel that concerns had been raised, that a single father with a military trauma background and a dead wife might not be a stable guardian, and that the county was opening a welfare review of Calvin's custody arrangement for the boy's protection. Translation: they were going to take Calvin, strip Gabriel of standing, make him a destabilized veteran instead of a grieving father, and bury the only witness to pit night inside a system the Stars owned. It was a good move. It was the move of men who'd always won this way. It was also the move that ended them, because it told Gabriel exactly which lever to pull. He didn't rage. He went home and built the next phase. And this is where Gabriel Dolan's particular genius showed. He never made the bad men suffer in his style. He made them suffer in theirs. Each fall would be authored by the very thing that had made each man powerful. The Quarry made Randy Starr, so the Quarry would take Ricky. Friday night was pit night. Gabriel knew because Forbes, rattled and desperate to look loyal, had posted a Rip Calvin story tagged at the North Pit, idiot-proof confirmation that the boys were gathering at the scene of their crime to reassure themselves. Gabriel and Ricardo were there first, in the tree line Calvin had filmed from, and they had spent the afternoon doing one thing: dropping the level in the North Pit's pump-controlled cold tank by 18 inches and propping its steel door with a wedge, then rigging the Scalehouse DVR to record continuously to a second drive Gabriel controlled. They touched none of the boys. They only arranged the ground. The six arrived with a case of beer and a portable speaker. They were loud, ugly, immortal. Ricky Starr, drunk and grieving the way a killer grieves, performing it, climbed onto the rim of the cold tank to give a toast to the snitches who can't swim, and put his foot exactly where Gabriel had known a drunk performing king would put it, on the wet steel lip 18 inches higher than his body expected the water to be. Gabriel did not push him. He would say that for the rest of his life, and it would be true. Ricky Starr's own swagger broke his own ankle when his own foot found nothing where he assumed solid footing, and he went into the cold tank his pack had once locked Nicky Soto inside. And the wedge let the door swing shut behind the Splash and the others, drunk, panicking, filming, of course filming, because that was the only response these boys had ever learned to a person in the water. Could not get the rusted latch open while Ricky screamed. In the 40-degree dark, Gabriel and Ricardo watched from the trees, motionless for 90 seconds, long enough for the boys to taste, exactly and personally, what they'd done to a 16-year-old girl. Then Gabriel walked down in a Quarry Company cap, opened the latch in 4 seconds because he'd loosened it that afternoon, dragged a hypothermic, ankle-shattered Ricky Starr out by his hoodie, and said into the boy's purple face, loud enough for the Scalehouse DVR's microphone, "Tell me who hurt the Dolan kid, and I'll call you an ambulance. Lie, and I leave." And Ricky Starr, king of Calder's Bluff, freezing, certain he was dying, with 5 witnesses he'd never trust again, told him everything, every name. The order Carroll gave them. The text from Ricky's own father, Randy, that Reed handled the situation, the soldier's brat saw too much. All of it recorded on Star Aggregate's own camera. Then Gabriel called the ambulance. He always called the ambulance. That was the line, and he never crossed it. And that distinction was the whole difference between him and the men he hunted. And he knew it, and it was the only thing that let him sleep. Ricky Starr arrived at Blount Regional at 11:50 p.m. with a shattered ankle, hypothermia, and pneumonia setting into both lungs. Placed, by the night charge nurse Erica Howell with a small private satisfaction, in the ICU bed directly across from Calvin Dolan's. 1 down. 72 hours had 30 left. The other 5 fell in 11 hours, each in his father's own coin, and Gabriel never laid a hand on a single one. Devin Dixon's father owned the dealership, and Devin had been quietly selling weed out of the loaner cars on the back lot. Gabriel had this from the pattern of life, the regular customers, the burner phone Devin thought was clever. Gabriel didn't touch Devin. He mailed an anonymous, perfectly accurate, evidence-attached tip to the one DEA field office Sheriff Perkins couldn't reach, time to land Saturday morning, and let the law the Dixons had always dodged finally knock. Devin ran. Devin, panicking, took a loaner Charger up the dirt bike trail he and Phillips raced, the trail Gabriel had marked on night 1, at 80 in the dark, and put it into the same culvert the boys had dared each other over for years. Broken pelvis, broken jaw, ICU. The dealership's own muscle car. The trail's own dare, the father's own arrogance that no Dixon would ever face consequences. Blount Regional, 3 doors from Calvin. Gene Phillips's father ran the concrete plant and had raised a boy who believed his fists were the answer to fear. So Gabriel gave him fear. A second envelope, this one to Phillips. The still of him laughing plus a line. Forbes already talked. You're the only one who hasn't made a deal. It was a lie about Forbes and a truth about leverage. Phillips, enraged and betrayed, drove to Tim Forbes's house to beat the truth out of him. And Tim Forbes, raised in a gun shop, terrified, did the thing gun shop boys are raised to do. He didn't kill him. He fired wide twice, and the second round caught Phillips in the shoulder. And now 2 of them were in the hospital, and 1 of them was in a cell. And Gabriel had never been within a mile of either. The gun shop's God the gun had finally been turned on the gun shop's neighbor. Juan Guerrero's father held the sheriff's bar tab and the town's secrets. Juan's downfall was simply that with the network collapsing, Gabriel handed Janine McGee the recordings, and Janine handed the FBI the forged withdrawal of Tammy Fowler's report. And Juan, already named on Ricky's confession, was arrested trying to flee in his daddy's base boat, which ran out of gas in the middle of the reservoir at 4 a.m. A Guerrero stranded on the water he'd always boated free. Felipe Price simply turned himself in, weeping, before the deputies reached him, which Gabriel counted as a kind of fall too. And Tim Forbes, the crack, the conscience, the boy who fired the shot, Gabriel made one phone call to. Not a threat, he said. You're the only one of the 6 who can choose what you are after tonight. The DA in Knoxville is named Stacy Mahoney. Call her before sunrise and tell her everything. And you walk out of this a witness instead of a defendant. Or stay loyal to men who've already given you up. Your choice. You've got till dawn. Then he hung up. Forbes called Mahoney at 5:14 a.m. He talked for 3 hours. By Saturday noon, 5 of the 6 boys were in Blount Regional Hospital. 3 in the ICU, 1 in the locked psych ward, 1 in surgery. Every injury self-inflicted, accident-inflicted, or inflicted by one another. Every one of them documented. Everyone earned by the exact mechanism that had made their families untouchable. The town that worshipped the quarry, the dealership, the concrete, the bar, the gun shop, and the insurance office watched its 6 princes fall through the floors their own fathers had built. The 6th fell last, and best. Merle Carroll watched it happen from his office, and Gabriel knew the moment the principal understood, because Carroll did what cornered men do. He ran for the records. He went to the school server that night to delete the original digital trail of Tammy Fowler's report, the only proof he'd buried it. But Tammy Fowler had given Gabriel her login on night 1, and Ricardo Copeland had spent his career inside networks that didn't want him there. The school server had been mirrored for 3 days. Every keystroke Carroll made deleting evidence was recorded, timestamped and forwarded live to DA Stacy Mahoney and to Janine McGee, who was at that moment standing in a federal building with a thick folder and a patient smile. Carroll deleted the file at 9:47 p.m., exhaled, and poured the scotch Gabriel had pictured. His phone rang. Unknown number, he answered out of habit. Ray says hello, Gabriel said, and hung up. The fathers came on the 3rd night, exactly as the original threat had promised, because men who have never lost cannot imagine that losing might be a thing that happens to them rather than something they do to others. It was Randy Starr who organized it. His son was in the ICU with pneumonia and a shattered ankle. His quarry's own camera was somewhere in the hands of a Knoxville DA. His name was on a recorded confession, and his 30-year empire was cracking like spring ice. He could not buy this away. The FBI didn't bank at his bank, and so he reverted to the oldest instrument the powerful own: violence applied directly, in the dark, with no witnesses. He gathered the 2 fathers who weren't yet in custody or hiding. Dolan's quarry, Forbes's gun shop, turned against him. But Starr still had the Dixon money, and a hired man named Travis Key, who'd done time and owed the stars for the lawyer who'd kept it short. 3 men, 3 firearms. 3 a.m. they kicked in the door of the small house on Quarry Road where the soldier slept, because the soldier was a grieving widower who'd spent his last 3 days at a hospital, and grieving widowers are easy. The door was easy. The house was empty. What Randy Starr never understood, what none of them understood, was that Gabriel Dolan had not slept in that house in 3 days, and that a man who spent 22 years anticipating ambushes does not stop simply because he's tired. He had known the threat the moment Carroll spoke it on the phone. Be ashamed to lose too. He had known they would come for him directly once the indirect plays failed. He had known the night, because the 3rd night was when Calvin's 72 hours ended, and the town would assume Gabriel would either be at a deathbed or a celebration, distracted either way. So Gabriel had set the ground one last time. The house had cameras in every room, cheap, legal, motion-triggered, the kind any frightened single father buys, with timestamps no defense attorney could challenge. It had a single light left on a timer in the back bedroom to draw the eye, and it had Sheriff Deb Perkins' replacement, a state investigator named Calvin Lawson from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, whom Janine McGee and D.A. Mahoney had pulled in 2 days earlier on the forged report evidence, and who had been very interested to learn from Gabriel that the men under federal investigation might attempt to silence a witness at a predictable time and place. Randy Starr kicked in the door at 3:02 a.m. He racked a shotgun in the dark living room of an empty house and called Gabriel Dolan's name in a voice that had threatened 100 men into silence. Travis Key swept the kitchen with a pistol. Dixon covered the hall. The floodlights came on. Every exterior light Gabriel had wired to a single switch, plus the TBI's vehicle spots, a loudspeaker, Lawson's voice, calm and total. Armed law enforcement, weapons down, on the ground. Randy Starr made the last decision of his life as a free man. He turned toward the light with the shotgun, because he had never in 60 years lowered anything for anyone, and a TBI tactical officer who had been watching 3 armed men break into a witness's home put 2 rounds into his chest. Travis Key dropped his pistol and his knees together. Dixon tried the back door and found Ricardo Copeland standing in it, unarmed, smiling, having politely waited the whole evening for exactly this. Gabriel watched it from the TBI command van a quarter mile up Quarry Road, on a laptop fed by his own cameras and the bureau's. Motionless the way he could be motionless, he felt no joy. He had hunted enough men to know that the wake doesn't bring anyone back. But he watched Randy Starr, the Quarry King, the man whose text had read, handle the situation. Go down on the floor of the house Hope had grown up 2 streets from, and he allowed himself one thing. He nodded. Once, the unraveling, once it started, had the speed of all things that were only ever held up by fear. Randy Starr survived the 2 rounds. Gabriel was almost glad. Death would have been mercy, and a Starr in a wheelchair facing trial in the county he'd owned was the more exact justice. With the patriarch down and Travis Key talking inside an hour to save himself, the recordings authenticated, the school server logs timestamping Carol's deletions, Ricky's confession on Star Aggregate's own camera, and Tim Forbes giving D. Stacy Mahoney 3 hours of names, the case stopped being a case and became an avalanche. Sheriff Deb Perkins was arrested for the forged withdrawal of Tammy Fowler's report, for the falsified rope swing incident report, and for obstruction. The badge number on the forgery was his own, the laziest signature of a man who'd never once been questioned. His nephew Glenn flipped on him by lunch. Janine McGee filed civil suit on behalf of Loretta and Nikki Soto, and on behalf of Calvin Dolan, naming the school district, the sheriff's department, Star Aggregate, and every father. And the discovery she pulled cracked open 11 years of pit nights, other kids, other silences, a whole sediment of buried things the quarry town had poured concrete over, and Merle Carroll. Carol's fall was the slowest, and Gabriel had designed it that way, because Carol deserved to feel each floor give out beneath him the way Calvin had felt his fingers go one at a time. The deletion logs alone were tampering. The recorded call coordinating pit night, Carol's own warm administrative voice, snitches sleep in the cold tank, was conspiracy. But the thing that finished him was the thing he'd been proudest of, his cleverness about Gabriel's past. Because in establishing that Merle Carroll had targeted Calvin Dolan specifically as revenge for the imprisonment of his brother Ray, Stacy Mahoney's office subpoenaed 3 years of Carroll's communications and found the letters, 40 of them, between Merle and Ray Carroll in Leavenworth, a patient, written, dated conspiracy to destroy the family of the soldier who'd put Ray away. Find the boy, isolate the boy, let the town do it so your hands stay clean. Premeditation in a brother's own handwriting. Carroll had built his revenge to be invisible, untraceable, deniable, a principal who never touched a child, only aimed them. He'd been so proud of the architecture, and it was the architecture that hanged him, because a thing built that carefully leaves blueprints. And Gabriel Dolan had spent 22 years learning that the careful man is only the man who leaves a neater wake. Merle Carroll was arrested in his office beneath 2 decades of wrestling photos. He asked for his lawyer. He did not chuckle. Gabriel went to see him exactly once at the county jail through glass. He didn't gloat. Gloating was for men who weren't sure they'd won. He sat down, looked at Ray Carroll's brother for a long moment, and said only this: "You told me my boy was weak." He filmed 6 men and a coward principal committing a felony, knowing what they'd do to him if they found out, and he kept that file safe so it would outlive him if it had to. He's 15. You spent 3 years and your brother's whole prison sentence trying to break one quiet kid, and the kid beat you with a phone before I ever lifted a finger. Gabriel stood. That's not weakness, Merle. You just never learned the difference. Neither did Ray. Tell him I said the affidavit's 42 pages this time. He left. Behind the glass, Merle Carroll said nothing at all, which was, Gabriel thought, the first honest thing the man had ever done. Calvin Dolan opened his eyes on the morning of the fourth day. The 72 hours had passed in the ICU while the 72 hours had passed in the town, and Gabriel had lived both. And when his son's eyes found him, confused, swollen, alive Gabriel Dolan, who had not wept at his wife's funeral because he'd been holding his son up, finally came apart quietly, with his forehead against the bed rail and his son's unbroken hand in both of his. Calvin couldn't talk for 2 days. The ventilator had scoured his throat. He wrote on a whiteboard Erica Howell gave him. His first word was Nikki, asking after the girl, before himself, and Gabriel had to leave the room for a minute to keep from frightening the boy with the size of what he felt. His second was the video. Gabriel wrote back, "Safe, it worked, you did it." And Calvin closed his eyes and a tear ran down into the white tape. And his father understood that the boy had carried this for months, certain he'd die with the secret, and had been afraid not of dying but of dying uselessly. He hadn't. That was the thing Gabriel made sure his son understood through every slow day of recovery. The courage was Calvin's. The plan had only been the delivery system. Across the ICU, in the bed Erica Howell had chosen with such care, Ricky Starr recovered from pneumonia under guard and watched the boy he'd left in the water wake up and be loved. And Gabriel let that be its own punishment. Because there is no cell crueler than being forced to witness the worth of the person you tried to erase. The trials took 18 months. Gabriel attended every day, in a clean shirt, motionless, taking notes nobody could read. Merle Carroll got 40 years. The conspiracy letters, the recorded call, the tampering, the pattern of 11 years of pit nights that Janine McGee's discovery had unearthed, and that other, older victims, finally believing they'd be heard, came forward to testify about. He would be 81 before release, in the same federal system as the brother whose imprisonment had started it, and Gabriel was told the two were housed in facilities 1,000 miles apart, which seemed to him a fine and specific cruelty. Randy Starr, from a wheelchair, was convicted of conspiracy and the attempted murder of a witness. The quarry was seized and sold, and the money, by the terms of the civil settlement Janine McGee won, built a thing the town had never had, an independent youth advocacy center, named, at Calvin's insistence and over his father's objection, not after Calvin but after Nicky Soto, who'd been locked in the cold and believed no one would come. Sheriff Perkins got 6 years, Travis Key testified and got out in 3. The 5 boys faced juvenile and adult charges in a tangle that took months. Ricky Starr, tried as an adult for what he'd done to Calvin on that dock, got the longest. Tim Forbes, who'd called the DA before sunrise, served 18 months in community supervision and became, Gabriel heard years later, a counselor for at-risk kids. The one boy who'd chosen, when offered the choice, to be something other than what he'd been aimed to be. Gabriel never forgave him, but he noted it, the way he noted everything, and he found he didn't mind. People in Calder's Bluff asked Gabriel afterward how he'd done it, how one man had taken down 6 families in 72 hours. He told them the truth, which nobody believed because the truth never sounds like enough. He hadn't done much of anything. He'd documented. He'd arranged a little ground. He'd made guilty men afraid of each other, and then waited for them to do to themselves what they'd spent their whole lives doing to everyone else. The quarry took the quarry's son. The gun took the gun shop's neighbor. The arrogance that no Starr, no Dixon, no Carroll could ever fall, that did all the rest. Gabriel Dolan had simply been standing in the wake. He sold the house on Quarry Road. He and Calvin moved to a place on the Rhone Highlands, up where the storm had once caught Hope laughing. And Calvin, who walked with a slight hitch now, and whose right hand had a scar across the knuckles where the fingers had been set, went back to photographing herons. He got good enough to sell prints. He testified at every trial in a voice that didn't shake, and afterward he told his father that he understood now what stillness was for. On the first anniversary of the morning Calvin woke up, the two of them sat on the porch and watched the light come up over the mountains, not talking for almost an hour, which Gabriel still considered the rarest talent he'd ever encountered in another human being. "You said something to me when I was out," Calvin said finally. "I don't remember the words. I remember the voice." Gabriel watched the light. "I told you being still isn't the same as being weak," he said. "And the people who can't tell the difference always find out, eventually." Calvin nodded, once, the exact economy of his father, and lifted his camera, and somewhere down by the water a heron rose, slow and patient and entirely unbothered, and was gone. Nathan again. "So, what do we actually take from that? Besides the satisfaction of watching arrogant people fall down stairs they built themselves. A few real things. First, the boring hero of this story isn't the ex-Delta dad, it's documentation. Calvin survived as a case because he preserved evidence and backed it up somewhere it couldn't be deleted. And the whole town's power structure collapsed the moment a forged report and a recorded call existed in a place the powerful couldn't reach. In the real world, you will almost never have a special forces parent, but you can always do what Calvin and Tammy Fowler did. Write it down, date it, save it where it survives you. Predators of every size, schoolyard or boardroom, depend completely on silence and on records they control. Take away either one, and they're just frightened people who got used to winning second. Notice that the counselor risked her job. The nurse bent a rule out of conscience. The lawyer took a hard case, and a teenage boy filmed something terrifying because it was the truth. The hero gets the credit in stories like this, but downfalls of this size are never one avenger. They're a quiet chain of ordinary people who each decided not to look away. That part isn't fiction. And third, the honest part, revenge this clean only exists in stories. Real justice is slower, uglier, and runs through subpoenas and courtrooms and people like D.A. Mahoney, doing unglamorous work for years. I wrote Gabriel to always call the ambulance, always keep the receipts, always let the law land the final blow, because the line between the hunter and the hunted was never their capacity for harm. It was that one of them documented and the other one deleted. Be the one who documents. Stay still if you have to. Just don't mistake your own patience for weakness, and never assume the quiet one in the room has nothing on their phone. Sleep well, lock your door, and back up your files.